Duchess of Sussex has apologised for misleading the High Court, saying she never intended to do so after she forgot she'd authorised a senior aide to brief the authors of an unofficial biography.
Meghan and Harry had previously denied making any contribution to Finding Freedom. Is Meghan manipulating the media? Going to debate that this morning. We're joined by ITV News' royal editor Chris Shipp. Firstly, just to be absolutely clear, Chris, where we're at. The reason that all of this has come up again is because of an appeal by the Mail on Sunday. Tell us what is at the heart of the story.
Yes, you might think that this court case would have gone away, but no, it hasn't. It's back in court because the Mail on Sunday are appealing against that earlier decision by a judge in the High Court. Now, look, I've sat through a lot of these court cases between Meghan and the Mail on Sunday. It's not the most exciting way to spend your day, but, you know, one thing was abundantly clear in those court cases was that Meghan and Harry had always said that they had not cooperated with the authors of Finding Freedom. They hadn't given them permission. They hadn't put them in touch with their friends. And yet, we now learn from one of Meghan's former aides, her former press secretary, that actually she did authorise him to have a meeting with the two authors of Finding Freedom. In fact, it wasn't a short meeting. It was a 2-hour-long meeting. Harry, Meghan had even had email exchanges with their press secretary during the day to discuss the meeting. And that's why yesterday Meghan had to apologise to the Court of Appeal and say it wasn't her intention to mislead either the defendant, the Mail on Sunday, or the court. So, but if you put that together with the other text messages we got yesterday between her and this press secretary, then it wasn't really a good day in court for Meghan at all, really.
Chris, can I just establish, though, the Mail on Sunday is not appealing over what was in or how they cooperated with Finding Freedom. Mail on Sunday's appealing over the summary judgment over the case of the letter that Meghan wrote to her father, Thomas Markle, where she says that 5 articles about that personal and private letter misused her private information, infringed her copyright and breached the Data Protection Act. So why is the Finding Freedom cooperation an issue?
It's an issue because it goes to the heart of the privacy case. It was the Mail on Sunday was arguing all the way through this that actually this letter wasn't private because she shared a draft with her former press secretary, and he was speaking about that yesterday. She sent him a draft. He actually was in Tonga on a recce for their upcoming tour. And she shared some text messages with him talking about whether or not the letter would leak. In other words, whether her father would give it to the Mail on Sunday, which she eventually did. And even during the course of those text messages, Meghan was, you know, referring to the fact that in the unfortunate event, I quote here, that it leaked, it would pull at the heartstrings if I were to call him Daddy. She also said, obviously, everything I have drafted is with the understanding that it could leak. So I've been meticulous with my words. And it's the Mail on Sundays putting this case to say, look, if you take those text messages, if you take the fact that she thought the letter would leak, if you take the fact that actually she knew she was opening up a bit of her private life to the authors of Finding Freedom, that's at the heart of this case about whether or not the letter was private and whether or not the Mail, as the High Court found, did breach her privacy. OK.
All right. Chris, thanks very much indeed. We're joined by journalist and royal commentator Emily Andrews and broadcaster and diversity advocate Atta Jewel. Very good morning to you both. Atta Jewel, does this undermine the idea that there is a huge intrusion into the privacy of this couple's lives, when we now know that there was cooperation with the authors of Finding Freedom, and we know that Meghan has acknowledged that the letter that she wrote, the private letter between her and her father that she wrote, that she acknowledged it could be made public?
Not at all. I've always been Team Harry and Team Meghan. I think, you know, at one point, Meghan was one of the most trolled women in the world. Really hateful things coming her way. She's just trying to defend herself. I completely support everything that she's done. I think if you were in the same situation, you would do the same thing. The letter is something which I think I completely relate, having a very sort of toxic, unhealthy relationship with my father as well, where your good intentions could be weaponized against you. That's something I relate to, and millions of others who have unhealthy relationships with their fathers can relate to. So no, I don't think it undermines their position, in my opinion.
Obviously, this is a very personal matter for them, very delicate matter as well. And when we hear they have defended themselves, said they didn't collaborate with the authors of Finding Freedom, and now suddenly it becomes apparent that they did brief one of their aides to talk to them, and they did share some information with those authors regarding that book. Does that undermine their position at all for you?
Well, as the palace once said, recollections do differ, but I know that they've apologised, they've moved on, and I mean, in my opinion, it's not, clutching your pearls that someone tries to defend themselves by, acknowledging that an aide can sort of greenlight something if that's what happened. I don't think that is the biggest deal to me when the whole world was attacking this woman.
Emily, I think there's an interesting point there, isn't there? Atta's just basically saying, look, that's not a massive surprise and it doesn't change their position and my belief in their position for her. And equally, the understanding of this letter that she wrote to her father, in the knowledge that it could well get leaked. That's just her being shrewd, isn't it? Obviously, she doesn't want it to be leaked. She wants it to stay private with her father. But, of course, everything was being sort of forensically seen and there was a chance of it being leaked. So she was just being diligent, wasn't she? Thinking carefully about the fact that if eventually people read this, I want them to understand that I'm not, the sentiment behind it clearly.
Well, I think that would be very much Meghan's position on this, as she has outlined in her latest witness statement to the High Court. But I think the key, really, to all of this is that she said this text message to her closest aide when they're discussing the letter. The words I have written, I could never publicly say, and it's so cathartic and it's so great to get it off my chest, just in case it were leaked by my father. I've set out my position in full. And I think that really goes to the heart of the issues for Meghan and Harry, and in fact, the issues potentially for the whole royal family and Harry and Meghan breaking away. Meghan went from being a little-known actress on Suits, where she could totally control her publicity, totally control her image. It was all fluffy. She had her lifestyle blog. She could have, freebie fashion stuff. She had lots of lovely coverage, and isn't she great? She's thrust into this unrelenting pressure and spotlight of marrying into the world's most famous family. And suddenly she couldn't control her image. And that really, really upset her. Now, on the one hand, you can say, well, of course she was, that must have been incredibly difficult for her and stressful. On the other hand, I think these emails and text messages that the court case has made public, and it's a fascinating glimpse, by the way, into the behind-the-scenes machinations of how the royal family are obsessed with positive publicity. And it just shows how her image was incredibly important to her, and she was absolutely ruthlessly focused on having a positive public image. What was said in public about her really mattered. And when you are that famous, you can't control everything. Obviously, many celebrities do. But what we see here is a real sort of celebrity approach to trying to control that image.
Emily, can I ask you, as somebody with an enormous amount of experience in tabloid journalism, by trying to control one's image and what people write about you, is there a danger you make it worse?
Yes, absolutely. Because, look, we can, there are pros, there are cons about journalism, about tabloid journalism. But at the end of the day, I think that most journalists, we all abide by the code, we hope to be impartial and to report accurately. But I think that if you try and exert too much control as the celebrity, as the people around you, I think that can have a deleterious and the opposite effect. I think it was fascinating in one of the emails that Meghan's aide, Jason Knauf, talks about an interview with Vanity Fair, and he's rather sniffy about how tabloidy Vanity Fair has gone. I mean, this is a huge glossy magazine published all over the world, and he says, crucially, there's a new editor at Vanity Fair. I will make sure that I call them and ensure that it's positive coverage. And I think going forward, we need to be a little bit more careful, and I will talk to the editor to make sure that, don't worry, ma'am, the coverage will be great.
Chris, it's interesting, isn't it? Our correspondent Louisa James made this point in her report, where she said, originally this court case was brought about Meghan and Harry protecting their privacy, And all of a sudden, through the appeal from the newspaper, we are seeing more, and as Emily was saying, further delving into the sort of inner machinations and how the world works from a PR perspective and privacy perspective within the palace.
I think that's entirely what happens when you really have a court case. This is an appeal, of course, because the Mail lost this, and they lost it on a summary judgment. In other words, a judge said this whole thing didn't need to go to trial and found it in Meghan's favour. The Mail on Sunday wants the whole thing to go to trial, and you can see exactly why Meghan and Harry don't want it to, because every time this thing appears in court, more and more details come out. Text messages are shared, some quite sort of personal text messages between her and her former communications secretary. So, I mean, if this thing were to go to trial, in other words, if the Mail on Sunday was successful in this appeal, then, you know, whatever happens, that's going to open them up to much less privacy that perhaps they had when they were in the royal family.
And Atta, the couple, as we've said, are so concerned about privacy, but they are accused of being hypocritical about that because they then do deals with big international broadcasters during which they open up their lives, their home, their inner thoughts. How and even with these cases, you know, so much more detail comes out. Are they really after privacy, or is this just a continual battle to get their own story out in their own words?
I think with Harry and Meghan, what was very shocking and probably hurtful for them was the huge racial undertones, which they have mentioned before, how they were talking, you know, every time Meghan was mentioned, it was, you know, she's the descendant of slaves, and other celebrities aren't spoken about like this. They have done deals with Netflix and other people, which is part of the celebrity game, which is part of public life. It's very much a case of controlling your narrative, which is nothing new. I think the privacy and the things, in my opinion, that are very hurtful and intrusive is when you go for these areas like your family and trying to dig up things like that. I think that there should be levels. And if we have learned nothing from how Princess Diana and Sarah Ferguson were treated, there are lines in the sand that I think should be drawn. And I think they're trying to draw it. And they are a new generation. I don't think she's putting up with nonsense in the same way other generations have. And I say good on her. Sometimes there has to be a line in the sand of what is acceptable and not acceptable for your mental health, for decency. I think this is, you know, all bets are off. It's a new game they're playing, and I think go for it.
Atta, thanks very much indeed. Atta Jewel. Emily Andrews, thank you very much. Chris, I think the case comes to an end today, doesn't it?
Yeah, 3 days this week, so we may or may not hear more interesting things today. And as I said to you at the beginning, often you're sitting through these court cases and it's not interesting at all. So let's see.
Glad you could come and share that with us, though, Chris. Good to get your perspective. As always, thank you for joining us.
I'm not sure that the tabloids ever find Meghan and Harry, any detail about Meghan and Harry, anything other than interesting.
Thank you for all your text messages as well. ER says, of course, Meghan's manipulating the media. Good for her, I say. They manipulate us enough. Chris says she seems very controlling. She likes to control the narrative. And Mrs R says exactly what Emily was saying. Remember, she's an actress. She's manipulating the press to her advantage because she's always controlled her own PR. And then Guy says, it's Harry I feel sorry for. It seems to me that she wants to be in full control of everything. Interesting hearing him talk yesterday. He was talking at an event, a Wired panel, about sort of the control of social media and the misinformation on social media.
Yeah. He says it's a global humanitarian crisis.
Yeah, but what was really compelling was he said more than 70% of the hate speech about my wife on Twitter could be traced to fewer than 50 accounts.
Wow.
Which is incredible, isn't it, when you think about there's that sort of that focus from 50 accounts, whoever they were being controlled by, however they were being controlled.
Are they real people?
Even if they are real people,
bots,
being generated by someone somewhere.
But there's also quite a lot of analysis that's gone into that
to
even discover that fact.
So they've said they've come off any social media platform.
Right.
He said it simply isn't true that the challenge of misinformation is too big to fix or too big to solve. And that's the point, isn't it? We all want the social media companies to try and control that a bit more, to stop the misinformation getting out there, to stop the trolling, the abuse, the racism. And often they say we're doing our best, they're just overwhelmed by the volume of it. He disagrees. He said it's not too big to fix and it's not too big to solve. They've just got to put their minds to it.
Yeah, although one person's misinformation is another person's freedom of speech, and that's, you know, at the heart of it as well.